Hello and welcome to Hare in the Hawthorn. And for regular viewers of the podcast series, you're probably wondering why I am introducing the podcast instead of Kate. Now, you'll be pleased to know that there hasn't been a mutiny on the good ship Harethorn, but today I am going to be interviewing Kate and find out a little bit about what makes her tick, why she's so interested in the fairies, and ending up with a special announcement. Some of you will have known about Kate's special news in the last couple of weeks, but we definitely want to talk about her new book, which we'll do at the end. But there's a long grilling to go on before we get to the book. You know, in true for those of you old enough who remember Jeremy Paxman on on the politics shows, never let a politician off the hook. Fortunately, Kate isn't a politician, so she won't be on that much of a big hook. So I should have said, for those of you who don't know, I'm Neil Rushton. I'm Kate's co-host for the podcast series, and of course you will all know Kate Rae. How are you, Kate?
I am I am very nervous, and especially after that introduction, I'm so glad that you said special news and then mentioned very briefly what that special news was, because people are going to go away having watched 15 seconds of this thinking Kate's pregnant. I am not. That's not the special news.
Yeah, I didn't think of it in those terms. No, it's definitely not special news. I'm going to give people a lightning quick preview of what the special news is. There you go. We'll be talking more about that later. So now Kate and I have known each other for over 2 years, I think. And when Kate interviewed me, that must be two years ago now.
Gotta be.
And that was great. So anyone who knows what I think about the fairies and the way I investigate them can just go and find that podcast from a couple of years ago. But in all of this time that Kate's been doing Hare in the Hawthorn, we haven't really, only in bits and pieces have we found out about Kate's mindset on the fairy phenomenon, what she thinks, who they are, what they are, how she writes about it, how she presents about it. So we thought um, right now would be a very good time to find out.
And break the enigma.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, your mystery is just going to fade after this podcast. Yeah. Um, right. So let's start up with a real simple one.
Mhm.
In why are you interested in the fairies to such an extent, and when did it first happen?
I think it's one of those things. I've spoke about this quite a lot on other people's podcasts, but it's one of those things for me where the fairy realm, the realm of the other. So when I talk about fairies, like yourself, I don't talk about winged creatures. I talk about it's the realm of the other and the other dimensions that exist within our material plane or just outside our material plane. And it's something that I've never I can not think of a time when I didn't understand that was there. I never really questioned it as a child. It was something that never entered into my head that that these things didn't exist. It was just a given, if you like. There wasn't a particular light bulb moment where I just thought, oh, fairies exist or ghosts exist or aliens exist. It's always been there. And I'd love to tell a tale of, being a child and coming across a leprechaun and a pot of gold. And, some people have wonderful stories where they have that moment, but I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever questioned it.
So, okay. So you've never remember you can't remember a time when you weren't questioning them. When did you start? Um, when did you start investigating them in a little bit more detail and really thinking, there's something, whatever, esoteric, occult, otherworldly, whatever word you want to use. When did that first happen? When do you think, this is interesting?
I was really fortunate that I grew up with a group of people, especially sort of preteen and beyond into my sort of 20s, who were very open-minded, and there was lots of literature being passed around that I suppose in mainstream, at that age, people wouldn't have been exposed to, and there was lots of discussions in the peer group, and the peer group was a wide range of age and background as well, which was really good into the melting pot. And we would often discuss subjects of 14, so all those things came into the melting pot. And for me, it again, it wasn't just the fairies, it was other things as well that came into that, other phenomena, and it's all the kind of high strangeness that occurs in the world and experiences that people had that absolutely fascinated me. So I was introduced to 14 times very early on in my teenage years. I was fascinated with that, and I think at that time there was this growing idea that I really enjoyed a lot of the philosophy around fairy culture, especially humans experiencing fairy culture, and it very much aligned with ideas of nature worship, if you like, or being in tune with nature, going out into woodlands, having a respect for the natural world. And so that just kind of aligned for me. And my research at that time, if you like, was more very, very loose, looking at people's experiences. The folklore side, I've really struggled with that, because it seems quite detached to me. So I never really read folk tales or fairy stories. And it wasn't really until I came across the work of Brian Froud and Wendy Froud that I suddenly thought, these people really truly understand the essence and the imagery of the fae world in the way that I feel it. So these animistic characters, they weren't necessarily glamorized, beautiful characters. They tended to have a lot of gnarly nature about them, which I don't think I've come across since seeing sort of Arthur Rackham's work. And Arthur Rackham was another artist who kind of hit the nail on the head for me as well. And there's a very similar theme of that, tittering on the darker side for me. And I did always understand the notion of those kind of dimensions have these extremes and these polarized extremes of, I suppose, light and dark elements to them. And it wasn't all about the sort of Tinkerbell, Peter Pan, Disney-esque aspect of it. And that was it, bingo. When I came across, I can't remember which Frown book it was. I remember a friend giving it to me and me opening it up to this page, and there's this beautiful painting, watercolor painting of a red-headed girl sort of peering behind a door, this really old gnarly door, and with big blousy roses around her head. And I just thought, that's bingo, that's it. This juxtaposition between the gnarliness of nature and the kind of very beautiful glamour of the fairy world. So I think that was the beginning, coming across his work.
That's interesting what you say about the disconnect between traditional folklore. I'm not really talking about the fairy tales. I'm talking about the folklore that began to be collected in the 18th century, mostly in the 19th and early 20th century. That was the folklore up until that point, and it's there. Whereas certainly since the maybe after the First World War, especially after the Second World War, later part of the 20th century, fairies got changed into something else in the modern conception of what they are. And like you say, and as we've talked about many times, that Disneyfication of the fairies. You say 80% of people, if you say fairy, they will think of Tinkerbell.
Mm.
Whereas that's a big disconnect from that traditional folklore. And I think people such as, well, especially Brian Froud, have recovered that, or helped to recover that, in the late 20th century up till today, because his imagery especially is very correlated to the traditional fairy folklore.
Yeah,
And that's an important thing. I think the way people, certainly folklorists and people studying the subject from a more esoteric perspective, have got that now. And always from my perspective, the folklore is essential. If you don't understand the folklore, you can't jump in to, oh, here's some modern fairy encounters. It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, from what you're saying, that's important. So while you're talking about Brian Frood, you know Brian a little, don't you? Do you want to tell us about your interactions with the great Brian Frood?
So I had the absolute pleasure. It was probably about, I don't know, 15, maybe more years ago, 15 plus years ago. So I was being a fangirl, and I went on a one woman mission to bug his agent to get particularly Wendy to put on a workshop to build. If you don't know Wendy's work, Wendy creates a lot of the armatured puppets for things like the Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth, and she also created the first Yoda on the Star Wars. And I was bugging their agent, and then it kind of everybody caved and went, yeah, all right then. And they ran an exclusive workshop from their house. And I couldn't breathe when she said, you're the first person we're inviting because you booked us so much. We're the first person to get an invite. And I genuinely couldn't breathe. And it was months away. And when I got to the village where they lived, I was stopping in the village, and the workshop started on the Friday night. It was Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And on the Friday night, it was about meeting and just chatting through what kind of things we wanted to build and make over the weekend. I had to go and sit on the top of the moors because I was having some kind of panic attack, because I just found myself, how do I cope with this situation? I very rarely find people who I revere in that sense at all. I don't. There are very few, but when I do, I get very excited and overwhelmed by the situation.
Mm.
I remember walking in and saying hello and introducing myself and apologizing for being late and saying, I've been sat up on the moors. I've had a mini meltdown. And I remember Wendy just being really down to earth and going, "What? We're human beings." So I spent that weekend with them. And Brian was bobbling about. He had a lot of work to do in his studio, and the house is just as you would imagine it. It's this old, beautiful, rickety old cottage, and it's filled to the rafters with their stuff, filled to the
Mm.
rafters. The second time I went on a subsequent one, a workshop with them, and Brian was a little more available at that time. And again, the first time he came into the room, and I was like, I don't know what to say, bit of a hero worship going on. But one of the questions that I did get round to asking him was how he gained his inspiration for his artwork, because I was genuinely interested. And he told this tale that was just so beautiful about the differences of the qualities of his interactions that he has with the Fey world. And one of them was that he would go out into the landscape and call upon the landscape to receive imagery from that landscape, from the spirits of the rocks and the trees and the rivers. And oftentimes they're the more kind of naturalistic looking images that we get. And he said, but the majority of the imagery, he will be working on a painting, and I'm actually looking at one of his paintings now because I can see this in it. And he will have a specific idea of what he wants to do. It'll have been an energy that he's encountered. And he said he gets bugged. He said sometimes there's a queue of them, and they won't go away until he actually creates them and puts them on paper. And he said that sometimes it drives him nuts, because he's trying to work on specific pieces, and they come along and they're kind of, tugging on his psychic coattails and saying, I want to be painted, I want to be painted. But you can imagine that of him, because there is an authenticity and a connection that he makes that very few people, I think, make that really deep connection. but yes, I've had the absolute pleasure of meeting them both, and even now when I see them, because I do see them at fairy festivals and down in Glastonbury, I'm still fangirl, and I'm still like, hi, you know, even though I've spent those 2 weekends, I still get very kind of very starstruck in the best possible way by them.
That's great. That's a lovely story. It's you know, it's a privilege for you to be able to meet them like that and spend some time with them. You touched there. This is an interesting point. You were talking about the potential psychic abilities of Brian. Um, in terms of general encounters with fairy type entities, whatever sort they are and however you want to define them, do you think that do you think there's a certain innate psychic ability within us all to be able to experience them? Or do you think this is only going to be allowed for a certain number of people whose um, brain transceiver valve has been switched on a certain way to receive a bigger consciousness, bigger awareness, another world, or whatever? So, do you think? What do you think about that?
I truly believe that we as human beings, we all have a divineness about us, and that divinity is something that we lose touch with to a lesser or a greater extent for various different reasons. I think that we have a level playing field when we enter this world about our ability to be able to converse and access other dimensions. But for whatever reason, for whatever paths people are taking on this planet, God, I sound like a right hippie. That they become detuned, if you like. It's almost like, in a very simplistic way, I believe that we all have these antennae that come up, and we can access the psychic world. But over time, some people's antennae lower or get disused, and they kind of they need to really work hard to get those things back. I believe we're all psychic. I believe as a human being, our ability to be able to receive energies is our divine right on this planet. It's whether we choose to tap into that. It's for me, and I will probably go into the ghost hunting side of it. So a lot of people say, like you say, I'm as psychic as a housebreak. It's not true. We all have these gut instincts and these gut feelings, and often they turn out to be true and they're inexplicable. Putting off a journey in a car and then finding out later that there has been a terrible accident. We're picking up energies all the time, subtle energies all the time. And I think that is part of having the psychic abilities to be able to then access energies that are just on the periphery of the material realm, if you like, whether that be spirits, aliens, fairies, cryptids, whatever that is. We all have the ability.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And while I do usually use the line, I'm as psychic as a plank of wood. Um, uh, Except when I take a psychedelic, then I suddenly become incredibly psychic, which is that that's just my particular way of opening up that valve. And I'm sure you're right in that everyone has that ability through a variety of means to overcome that blockage, a blockage which I'm pretty certain is partly due to living in modernity. These kind of thoughts are not encouraged and frowned upon or ridiculed. And so people will switch off with it and they'll live in their material, modernistic lifestyle, and anything that infringes on it, such as supernatural fairy type entities appearing in our reality, is going to be it's going to be a no-go area, isn't it? And
Mm.
I think so. That's a long way of saying I think you're right. Everyone has this ability. It's just how they can possibly harness it in under the right circumstances. So okay, we are going to stick to fairies for most of this discussion. Um, but of course, you were also, I don't know the correct terminology for this, a ghost hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And what you can tell us a little bit about that, but I don't want you to go on too long about it, okay? Because we need to get back on on the subject. So I want you to tell me a little bit about it. But what I'm really interested in is the crossover between various paranormal investigators, if I can use that. I know these terms come and go and they become more unfashionable. And I've heard people say, no, you shouldn't say paranormal investigator, but we know what we mean when we say paranormal investigator. So what I'm interested in is how the people you mix with in something when you go out, like trying to locate a ghost at a location, those people who are doing that, how they how they cross over or don't cross over into the area that you're especially interested in, which is fairy type entity phenomena. And for people who don't know, Kate regularly writes for a magazine called Haunted, which is monthly magazine. Monthly, is it? Quarterly.
Quarterly.
Quarterly magazine. You know, uh, very, very glossy, lovely put together magazine. But Kate's pieces are usually kind of they stand out from the other pieces in that then she's not really writing about ghosts, she's writing about fairies and what that interaction or comparison between fairies and ghosts are. So there you go. That's another long rambling non-question, isn't it? But it's the way I do things.
It's good.
Um, and so so there you go. So just tell us a little bit about the ghost hunting and especially what you think about that meshing or lack of it between the people involved.
Well, I mean that this podcast came about because of the two worlds colliding for me. Because I genuinely wanted to start supporting people to change their perception of what otherworldly entities are. And so I started ghost hunting very, very briefly. I turned a certain age to mark that landmark, I suppose, of my life. I decided I was going to do something that scared me. And the only thing that I could think of at the time, I mean, most people bungee jump or take a flight in a helicopter or whatever it is. So my biggest fear at that time was ghosts, and particularly poltergeists. And I mean, it terrified me. The thought of poltergeists particularly terrified me. I had reoccurring nightmares and still do. So I decided to go on my first ghost hunt. I contacted our friend Lionel at the time and asked him for advice about how to go about this 14 experience that I was embarking on.
This is just to clarify that's Lionel Fanthorpe, who we've interviewed a couple of times on this on this channel, and is of course a superstar of the paranormal community. Sorry, go on.
So I embarked on that. I went on one ghost hunt on my own with a really good team. And then things just snowballed. The universe went, yeah, this is what you're meant to be doing. And I was introduced to a lot of brilliant people. And I found myself very, very quickly, I mean, very quickly in those early days, being invited into the Ghost Finder Paranormal Society, which is headed up by TV presenter Barry Guy. And I've been with them since. And on these ghost hunts, I was learning mediumship as part of my development as a ghost hunter. And I was crap. I am a crap medium. I can tell you that here and now. And I was very rarely coming in contact with the spirits of the dead. I found it very, very hard to tune in to the spirits of the dead in properties that we're going into, and very, very difficult to communicate with them. They were giving me symbols back, but they weren't really communicating. I'm not a natural medium. However, what I found at that particular point in time with that development was that I wasn't coming across the spirits of the dead, I was coming across these other entities and energies. Now, when described within a ghost hunting or a paranormal community, a lot of the time these energies and entities would have been very confused with very malevolent, darker spirits, and using the words like demonic or lesser demonics. And what I was finding was they weren't of that realm at all, and they weren't ever dead. They are very much living, but within their own dimensions. And I started to be able to communicate with them, and they would tell me about the activity that they were causing within a property, which correlated a lot of the time to the activity that was occurring. So the very first time that I came across these beings, if you like, in a way that I couldn't ignore them, I spoke to a colleague and said, "This is what I'm seeing on a psychic level." And it was met with lots of swearing and disbelief, and you going nuts. And the more that I started to trust myself with coming across these beings, the more they started to communicate with me, the more I was able to corroborate with historians, people living in properties, etc., that what I was saying, what I was relaying back was true. The more people, I think, started going, "There's something in this." And the community started to become interested in what fairies were. Because, like we said at the start of this, most of them had this image of a sylph like Tinkerbell, these sexualized, scanty clad creatures, flitting around. And once I was able to sort of start talking to some of them about the differentiation between what we understand in popular culture and what is actually real within that realm, how they interact, why they're there, and all those other elements, people started to get genuinely interested. And from that, I have been asked to give talks about it at different paranormal conferences. And it starts off, I can see people sort of, grinning at me or quizzically looking at me, or, this kind of, "She's mad, but I'm going to
Yep.
listen."
Yep.
And by the end of it, people are going, "No way. We have, as paranormal investigators, encountered what you are talking about. These energies that are not responding to classic low-level exorcism. They're not responding to things like sage or the Lord's Prayer or all these things that the paranormal community have in the toolkit. It's because they don't recognize those things. And I did find through communication that a lot of these beings wanted to convey their story, and they wanted to be listened to, and they had a purpose of being there. It was very rarely that I'd come across them where they couldn't remember their purpose. They were quite ancient. All sounds completely mad. But is it any more mad than talking to the spirits of the dead? I think it's a real serious subject, especially if you're a ghost hunter and you are coming across repetitive energies that will not shift. The next question is, why won't they shift? And is it because they're not responding to how we deal with ghosts, demonics? So that's where we're at. That's why the podcast came into play. And I suppose that's where my writing for Haunted magazine comes from, because it's thinking outside the box. It's looking at other possibilities. And like I say, from the get-go, it's the 14 that interests me. It's the whole dimension of high strangeness, and it's interconnectivity as well. Nothing exists without a correlation or a relationship, or some kind of knock-on effect of something else. And I don't think that ghosts are standalone. I don't think fairies are standalone. I don't see these as separate subjects. They're all interlocking and interlinking.
And so, yeah, but so the acceptance amongst the ghost hunting community, if I can call it that, what is their acceptance of what you're saying? Is it a general kind of "that's interesting, maybe, maybe not," or have they gone along with you completely, or is it split in proportion to the people? What's the situation there?
I think in the early days when I started talking about it, it was absolute. It was taken as absolute nonsense, um, and I can understand that. I can understand that. When you don't have a broader picture about what fairy is, you think, how can I be haunted by something like Tinkerbell? It's not something that that people really consider. But I think the more um, people are explaining these energies and these beings, the more it's being accepted, and people are much more open to listen and are genuinely interested in doing further research themselves on the subject, which is great, because I think if to be a well-rounded paranormal investigator, you have to have a really broad um, research base, and a really broad and open mind. This is a community that has the capability of being very open-minded to other things that may be occurring. I mean, we take something like the Skinwalker Ranch in America, which is this hotbed of alien activity and ghost sightings and cryptids and ancient Native American skinwalkers and things like that, and it's all in one very, very minute area. And for me, that kind of research that's going into that place just highlights how limiting it is for us to think that there are only spirits of the dead that dwell close to our material realm.
Yeah, that, well, as you know, and as we've talked about many times before, I'm in complete agreement with that. And I think it's becoming a little bit more of a consensus amongst people who study this, an academic level, that all of these non-human intelligent entities, that's a nice catch-all for all of what are not actually existing in our material reality, but are able to interact with it. So whether it's the occupant of a UFO, whether it's a cryptid, whether it's a ghost, whether it's a fairy, they're all kind of the same thing. A lot of people don't like that. They like to have their little categories and have everything split off into silos, but I don't think that can be justified anymore. There's a lot of overlap between these different types of phenomena. But you're right, what you say about the fairies, it's become almost the last taboo. I think that's changing.
Mm.
But people, if you talk about ghosts, oh yeah, I have a ghost story. UFOs, oh well, yeah, they're probably aliens. I specifically do not think they are aliens, extraterrestrial aliens, but that's another subject altogether. But it's so it's changing. I think that's changing. I think you're helping to change it with this podcast and writing for Haunted, spreading the word, spreading the fairy word amongst
Mm.
ghost hunters, to just try and just what do you think about that? But I remember a couple of months ago I went and did an interview on Iconic, which is David Icke's channel. Unfortunately, David didn't wasn't the person who interviewed me, but the chap who did interview me at the start when he was introducing the piece, um, he said something along the lines of, "We're used to talking about all sorts of esoteric matter here, but today's subject matter may be a stretch even for the most open-minded." And so even on David Icke's channel, he's suggesting the fairies are still kind of woof.
Mm.
That's one too far. But I think that is changing
Yeah,
now.
definitely. I mean, you know historically, and this is something that really highlights this is, it's not that far back in human history that we used to believe that the fairy were the spirits of the dead, and that the spirits of the living human spirits that after you die actually diminish in size, and they become part of the fae. That's one of the theories. So there is this huge knit between the spirits of the dead and the fairies.
Yeah,
It's not that far back in our thinking. There would be even people alive today who still have that notion. I mean, we talk about the Isle of Man, the lots of stuff that goes off on the Isle of Man in terms of weirdness, but they use the word spook to denote anything of high strangeness. So whether
yeah.
that is a spook is a spirit of the dead, or spook is fairy, or spook is something that they can't explain. So, it's all kind of a laid out interchangeable feast, really.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. And oh, God, I shouldn't be talking about myself at all, but just very quickly, just in relation to that, I've just written an article for my blog site talking about the relationship between fairies and prehistoric sites, and there, when I was writing that, it became very clear to me. It was kind of clear before, but this honed it in, the relationship between the dead and the fairies in historic folklore is like that.
Mm.
And especially in Brittany, to some extent, Ireland and the Isle of Man. So that's that's very interesting. But we need to shift gears before we run out of time,
Mm-hmm.
and so we can talk about the news and so we can talk about Wollaton Park, which.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll talk about that in a moment, but there's just one other thing I have to ask you about. Why do you have an obsession with Erwin Saunders?
I think I tell you what, right? My the first thought that came to mind, I've never been asked that before. I think the first thought is, my very first sort of hero worship that went on as a child, right? And this is how strange I am. My hero as a child, I mean, most girls, would be looking at pop singers or film stars. Mine was David Bellamy. I'm not
good,
shitting you. It
good
was
bloke, David Edmund. Yeah.
He was. I mean, he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. To the fact where he got banned from TV for his views, which stand up for what you believe, David. Good on you. Anyway, I got to meet him. As part of a school project, and we were. This is going to be very very quick, but we were mapping out in Sherwood Forest an oak map of Britain. It was a gimmicky thing to get oaks back into the woodland. And I was the O in Oxford. I remember it as clear as day. I was probably about 10 years old, 9, 10 years old. And I was holding up at the O for Oxford as the journalistic helicopters, the helicopters were going over. And from behind me, somebody tweaked me in my ribs, and I kind of jumped and flung my O behind me. And I was obviously really mad because I was concentrating on being the O in Oxford. I turned around, it's David Bellamy, and I was like, and he was just laughing his head off, absolutely laughing his head off. And he asked me a few questions. I was just like, I can't talk. So anyway, onto the Erwin Saunders thing. There is very much that kind of bumbling, mono-focused, very passionate kind of thing about Erwin Saunders. But particularly, what I do like, and it fascinated me, I went and I did fine art. And one of the things that fascinated me was this creation of a reality to the point where people believed in it. And with Erwin, he really taps into that kind of Victorian Edwardian explorer. He's got that kind of, side to him, and that tapping into fantasy. I mean, there was a few artists who I really liked who did it well. One was I'm going to get this wrong. Is it CF Alex CF, who created cryptid, sort of mummies and bits of skeletons of fairies and that kind of thing, and actually presented them in a museum fashion as they were real and they were actual, and kind of duped the world that he'd found this collection of this Victorian collection of mummified cryptids. I love that. I love that kind of being able to dupe people with something that is magical and fires up the imagination. And Erwin definitely does that, and he does it so well and so beautifully. And the fact is, do I care whether this is a creation of his or not? No, I don't, because if it's creation, it's a beautiful creation. And if it's not, then wow, but yes, there you go. Bit long-winded, but David
No,
Bellamy started it.
David Bellamy and Erwin Saunders. Yeah, no, I can definitely see the connection there. No, that's brilliant. And if people want to see, I mean, Kate's talked about Erwin Saunders, usually without me, it has to be said, because I'm not probably not quite as obsessive about Erwin Saunders, but there's several podcasts where she does pieces. If you want to, trawl through the videos of Hare and the Hawthorn from the past few years, and you will find Kate talking at more length about Erwin Saunders. So as we come towards the end of the interview, it hasn't been too bad, has it?
No, you've been very tame.
Yeah, well, wait for the last
Mhm.
5 minutes, my dear. We are going to talk about Wollaton Park
Mhm.
in Nottinghamshire. Now, once again, you'll be able to find several videos that we've done on the subject, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's, very briefly, most people watching this will know it's a story from 1979 at Wollaton Park in Nottinghamshire, just outside Nottingham. And it's the story of several children who one September evening climbed over the walls and the gates to Wollaton Park and had an experience with gnomes. Very kind of archetypal gnomes, but not so archetypal in that they were driving around in like little noddy cars. There's an enormous amount to unpick from this story, as we've been finding out
Mm.
lately. And it's so that doesn't make it sound deep, but this is a deep story at so many levels, and it's very interesting. So before we go on to your book, we'll just show here's one book, Simon Young's edited book of the Wollaton Gnomes, which has all of the transcriptions from the kids who went through the experience. Simon tries to unpick it, what may have been happening, what was not happening, and then there are several essays, both by myself and Kate and others, in that book, The Wollaton Gnomes: A Nottingham Fairy Mystery. So that's where we are that's definitely the most recent publication that's come out about the Wollaton Gnomes. But since it came out, we've been finding out some more things, haven't we? And we've been doing a little bit more research. Do you want to just briefly say, without going into the Wollaton story in any detail, just what we've been doing in the past few months?
So from that book, there was it kind of narrowed down to a few of us who embarked on some field research, which was really nice. So both myself and Neil, and with Joe Hickey Hall, we are all part of the Fairy Investigation Society. You can find that on Facebook. Um, and we decided to get on the ground really and check Wollaton out. I must say that when Neil pronounces Wollaton, I have literally, I'm from Nottinghamshire, so I have asked several different people over the course of the last few months from the area, with slightly different dialectal tones going off, how they pronounce the park, because I'm sorry to say this, Neil, you sound really posh when you say it. Um,
Well, don't you know, I am very sort of a
you
posh
are
person.
very posh, very posh, and the colloquial is Wollaton, and I need to put that in there, hence the book,
Yeah.
because it becomes a strange thing if you pronounce it how it looks like it's written. So we went on the ground and we did a good few hours in the park where we had the chance to go around with a lovely psychic medium and record some bits as we were going along, just to get the lay of the land, to try and find out where the children had come over into the park, because that's something that's not well documented. For me, this encounter with this real encounter is perhaps one of Britain's most well documented encounters because of the interviewing with the children that went on afterwards. They were interviewed several times by various different people, and various prominent people as well who interviewed them. So that's what makes it a fascinating case for me, Joe, and for Neil, and as with others who are looking into it. It's an ongoing case that's just kind of folding out into all kinds of different weird and wonderful ways. So where it goes from here is just as exciting as the original case, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite put it that way. The original case is mind blowing. I think the only way it could become quite to that level is that if we had the experience,
We will.
which would be wonderful. Whether you've taken any substances before for it or not. Yes. So and we do have some plans for various projects which we're not allowed to talk about at the moment, but we are planning things for some exciting times ahead in terms of the research on and and dissemination of our ideas on the Wollaton Park Gnomes, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, right. That's an easy one. Yeah.
Yes. I'm keeping my mouth shut because if I start talking, then things will slip out. So
You'll give it away. Well, there's something to look forward to. Obviously we will announce things as they happen when they happen. These things, they usually grind slowly. So you kind of expect everything to happen immediately, but that's not the way things work for these type of projects. So we well, it's more than a related, it's completely integrated with Wollaton and the story. We will finish off with the news that I promised, that no, Kate isn't pregnant,
no,
but she has.
birthed.
Well, yeah, you could say you've birthed some literature here.
Mhm.
So there's Kate's new book, fresh off the press. Thank you for sending me a gift copy. That's very kind of you. And yeah, the Woolly Snotts, not the Wally Snotts. See, I would say it's the what's that double O? Why isn't the Wally Snotts? But it's not. It's the Woolly Snotts. The Curious Case of the Wollaton Gnomes. Now, I read this in the first completed transcript for Kate, to and so I didn't have to, I read that transcript and I was a little bit worried before I read it because, what if it's no good? How am I going to tell Kate it's no good? Fortunately, I didn't have to worry about that because it is really good. And I'm not just saying that because
Bless you.
Kate is my co-host. This really enraptured me. And I just read it in 2 sittings, gave Kate some corrections, and that it entranced me. And it's I won't say too much. I'll let you talk about it in a moment. But it's the one thing that comes across is that it's ostensibly a book for children, so maybe slightly older children. But the point I got out of it is, and this is the best comparison I can possibly give you. It's the Watership Down effect. Richard Adams wrote Watership Down for children, but it's not really a children's book. Children can get something out of it, but if you want to understand the root of it and the core of that fantastic novel, you've got to you've got to be an adult and read it. And that's the feeling I got from the Woolly Snots. It's not about rabbits, but it is about gnomes. And what's fantastic about it is that it's from the gnomes' perspective in leading up to and then what happened in 1979 with the children. And that's very new, innovative way of thinking about it. And I was deeply impressed with this book, which also includes some of, I'm not going to be able to find them now, some of Kate's own illustrations. Ah, there you go. Talk about Watership Down.
There's little hair.
That's just an example. There are lots of illustrations throughout, which add to the wonderfulness of this book. So there I am gushing about your book.
I know, and I'm dying inside. I can't. It's actually really high praise coming from you, and because I know that you said to me that you would be very, very honest and I want to thank Neil publicly because Neil did help me a great deal, and I completely entrusted him with that first draft to be able to tell me, no, Kate, this is crap, and go away and burn it. And I did trust him to tell me the truth on that.
Yeah, and I would have. I did actually have
Yeah,
the red pen at the ready. Rubbish, rewrite, but that wasn't the case. So just briefly, and certainly not giving any spoilers away. Do you want to tell us first what made you think to do this specifically? Obviously, when you wrote this, we were already well into the Wollaton Gnomes material and research, but this is coming at it from quite a radical left field angle. So that's the first question. What made you? How did it come into your head to look at it from this perspective? And second, it's not really a question. It's just I want you to tell me. Did you enjoy writing it? Did you feel a connection to anything otherworldly while you were writing it? So those are the two questions about the book. What do you think?
Like you say, we're in the midst of, we were well in the thick of that first section of research, and we had the Wollaton Gnomes, uh, Simon Young's, with our essays in it, had been published. I remember very vividly coming across the Wollaton Gnomes in 14 times as a teenager and reading it and dismissing it as absolute tosh. It just sounded so ridiculous. And I suppose it's that element of it that really captivated me again, being less snobbish, I think, about such things, and revisiting it from that academic perspective, I suppose, and that research perspective. And the more I looked into it, the more there was questions about how things had occurred. And I'm not going to give too much away of what that is, but there were lots of things within the details that the children gave that were particularly ridiculous, that I was like, I can't get my head round how this would occur, because there were themes in it which weren't particularly relatable in terms of fairy encounters, either modern or historic. And those questions played on my mind quite a bit. And at the time, I'd sat down, bless her, with Joe Hickey Hall. We were doing a once a week communication, because uh, a sort of a writer's support thing, and I was looking at doing more of a field guide, and that's something that I'm still going to sit down and do, more of a field guide thing within the fairy realm. And I couldn't write it. I sat down time and time and time again, and it was like chewing glass. It was just, I found it very, very difficult. Couldn't get my head around it. And I think I spoke to you the day after, and I just said, I've had this idea. It's come out of nowhere, and the Woolly Snotts was the name. It just came. And when I sat down to write this, I wrote the book in 7 days, and I hand wrote it. And there were periods of time when, and it's not a particularly small book either. When I say 7 days, it's hovering about 180 odd pages. I literally felt like I was channeling. That's the only way I can describe it. And I know this is going to sound really trite and really ridiculous, but I was writing things and my eyes would go funny and I couldn't even see what I was writing. I was writing so quickly, and I was having clear imagery come to me that I couldn't have sat down and pondered. And there was a couple of times I remember while I was writing it where I lifted my head and I just thought, I don't know how do I answer that? What is going off with that particular element? And bam, just like that, I would get a really vivid, clear image, and I'd be like, wow, that's it. It was almost like I wasn't writing it. I did have the feeling that there was some external help, in a way, because I've never written anything like that. For me, writing at university and throughout, doing A levels, etc., has always been very constructed, very academic. I know where I'm going. It's very much me. I felt like I was telling their story genuinely. I genuinely felt like I had been given their story to tell.
Mm.
And that's the only way I can describe it. It was a magical experience. I was just sitting writing chapter after chapter after chapter. I was getting up first thing in the morning. I was writing till late on at night. It was a real magical experience. It was really enjoyable.
That's great. It's I remember you telling me at the time that you were doing it, and said, "Oh, well, I've just finished the story." What do you mean? You only started it last week? took, took me a year to write both my novels. What are you talking about? You can't possibly have written it. But it's well, you obviously you wouldn't know that you'd written it that quickly, but there is a feeling of the characters in it. They all have their special voice, and it does feel as though it's coming from somewhere else. It if I hadn't known you'd written it, I wouldn't have thought that was your voice.
Mm.
It doesn't sound, obviously, I've only seen stuff you've written and the podcast, but I know you well enough
Mm.
to see how you talk, either textually or on video, And if I didn't know, if someone had sent me that, if you just sent that text to me anonymously and
Mm,
said, can you, what do you think of this? Oh, well, Kate didn't write that.
mm,
That doesn't sound like her voice at all, which is interesting. It's not usual for an author to do that. You read any novel, yeah, any fiction, you will always see the author
yes.
in that fiction, and I don't see much of you in it apart from the great knowledge of what was going on at Wollaton Park. Wollaton Park, don't you know?
Wollaton.
Hold on, East Midlands accent. Wollaton Park. How's
That's
that?
nearly there. Nearly, nearly. That was a little brummy, though, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to get in trouble for that, aren't I? Yeah.
Mm,
So, so there it is. It's the Woolly Snotts once again. Some beautiful illustrations as well with it. It's really, really worth it. I think it's for anyone. Like I say, it's not really a children's book, either, although children will enjoy it at some level. As an adult, you'll enjoy it at another level. And if you know anything about the Wollaton Park story, you'll get all of the references
mm.
immediately. So thoroughly recommended,
Thank you.
as they say. Um, Now, the only issue at the moment is distribution. Do
Mhm.
you want to just tell us, is this going to be on the evil empire of Amazon anytime soon?
That is in the process. I mean, I am the kind of personality that I like everything yesterday, and I really bullied my lovely publishers. I'm just going to give a shout out to Mark and Anne, because taking me through this process, I couldn't have asked for any better people to help me through the process. But I really bullied them to get this done. I had this vision of it being done before the summer solstice. And particularly to take it to Three Wishes Fairy Festival. I wanted that to be my kind of leap off, my launch pad, if you like, with this book. Um, so because of that, it's meant a delay on the registering the book to be able to go to the big giants and to be able to be accessed and available on Amazon. It should be, fingers crossed, by sometime in July. But again, that's in the ether. How quick that moves along. However, you can get copies direct from me. Find me on Facebook. If you find me direct, it's Kate Haregirl Rae, and it's spelled slightly differently to how it's spelled on here. So it's Rae Rae as opposed to Ray Rae. So you can find me on Facebook. Just drop me a message, say you'd like a copy. I've got very few copies of the first batch left. I was only going to order personally a certain amount to distribute myself while we're waiting for this to happen. They've nearly all gone. I am absolutely chuffed about that. So there are a small number of those. I will be buying another batch. They will all be personally signed because they're coming from me, and I can sell them a little bit less. Because it's not, we're not paying Amazon prices, etc. So for a short period of time, there will be direct from me, and I can sign them.
That's fantastic. Yeah, no, it's a nice little touch, just signing copies. And always with, independent authors, if you can buy it direct from the author, so much the better, because, well, yeah, it's just obviously you're not giving money to the behemouthian organizations that seem to rule our world these days.
I
Okay,
think can I just say
yeah,
there
yeah,
as well, there's another lovely aspect of that from buying from an author, is the fact that you get to interact with them as well. So the
yeah.
people that I've spoke to, I mean, I've had people on Facebook who have contacted me, haven't spoken to them for years. I know them personally, and we started chatting again. Or it's people that have contacted me and know me periphery on Facebook, and have been able to start building up a relationship with them. And for me, that's been really nice. And I have asked people and said, really love some feedback about the book. It'd be really nice. It doesn't have to be anything formal, just for me personally. So that's been a stellar aspect of it. I
Yeah.
just need to say one more thing about the book. So the name The Woolly Snotts is not what you think, and the book explains it. However, I did want a title, a bigger title, to be as ridiculous as the case felt to me to begin with. The second element of it is, and one thing I've certainly got to mention is, it was my absolute pleasure that Reverend Lionel Fanthorpe and his lovely wife Patricia wrote the preface for this. And anybody who knows me will know that that was kind of a real big thing. So I want to thank them as well for doing that for me. And I think that's all I need to blither on about.
That's brilliant. No, it's brilliant. Go out, get out and buy it, straight from Kate, or if you wait for the distribution giants to put it out. Either way, you'll love it. I'm sure. You'll once the reviews come in, you'll be very, very happy for what for that feedback that you're going to get, because it is a lovely book, and I think you're right about that interaction with people when you've put your heart and soul into something like this, and then people don't just buy it off Amazon, they buy it direct from you, and there's a bit of interaction, and they might have some questions or whatever. Although I remember my first novel, when the people I knew, some people I knew who read it just said, "I don't want anything to do with you. You're a weirdo."
Nice.
But that's another subject, and that was, well, whatever.
Well, having read both of your books, I can categorically say that yes, you are a weirdo. But
yeah, that's the way we that's the way we like it. That's the way we like it down our way, isn't it? Who wants to be straight?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. That's fantastic. We've got, we said, 40, 45 minutes. And of course, we're here an hour later. So I think on that note, we will wrap it up. Thank you very much, Kate, for allowing yourself to be interviewed on your own channel. It's been enlightening, and I hope people think they know a little bit more about Kate and what she thinks and why she's doing what she's doing. In the future, Kate and I will be doing future podcasts on Hare in the Hawthorn. Hopefully we'll be able to talk some guests into coming and joining us on the virtual couch before too long, and occasionally it'll just be myself and Kate chatting about whatever fairy thing we want to chat about. So keep a lookout for that. I presume if you're watching now, you're subscribed and you're getting notifications. If not, please think about doing so. So thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
And it only remains me to say that you need to press the stop recording button. Don't forget about that.
I do. Nobody wants to listen to our waffling on after this.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kate, and see you next time.